everybody, Paul Mack here. You know, I love using rope. Rope is just old-fashioned. It's a great tool on the farm. I use it to strap down loads in my truck if I'm hauling something. I strap down big round bales of hay in my trailer. I strap my boat down in my boat trailer if I'm going fishing. It's just so versatile. And, you know, it's old-fashioned. That's why I like it, especially if you know a few basic knots, farm knots that, you know, get the job done. I love using rope. You say, well, Paul Mack, do you ever use ratchet straps? No, not really, because I kind of hate ratchet straps. Actually, it's more accurate to say that ratchet straps hate me. They always seem to break. Maybe it's because I'm buying the cheap ones. I'll have to think about that. Anyway, I don't really care for ratchet straps. I like rope. But there are certain times on the farm where I need strength, and I don't want to question whether the rope is strong enough. And so in those instances, I like to use my favorite farm tool, the steel cable, or wire rope as it's sometimes called. And this steel cable is one of the strongest materials, well, I shouldn't say on the planet, one of the strongest materials on my farm, because it's so hard to break, and it's so hard to cut, actually, unless you know what you're doing. But the steel cable, it's such a versatile tool. Now, a steel cable is an easy thing to assemble, but what makes it such a beautiful thing is that you can customize it to your own specific needs on your homestead or farm, with loops and fixtures, you know, different fixtures on it, different types of hooks on it. That's what makes it my favorite farm tool. Now, to assemble one, all you need basically is obviously a length of steel cable, either short or long. We'll talk more about that in a second. And then the hooks, or whatever you want on each end of it. And then the little clamps or crimps to fasten the loop back down with. And that's pretty basic. That's all you need to assemble one. Not very hard at all. Now, they make different diameters of wire rope. Sometimes a smaller diameter for maybe pulling up, you know, small brush saplings, pulling them up out of the ground, or really, really big ones for use with large machinery. I like the 7/16 wire rope. I think that's what this is. It seems to be the common diameter that's good for just about anything you're going to encounter on the small farm or homestead. The wire rope, as I said, it's a difficult material to cut. And if you attempt to cut it with any type of like a bolt cutter or something, you end up, you know, chewing it up, and it gets frayed, and it just becomes a mess. Probably the easiest way I've found is to put some tape, maybe electrical tape, around either side of where you're going to cut it, and use a hand grinder with a cutting disc on it. It's probably the easiest way to cut this steel cable. And I know it's hard because I've watched hardware store employees attempt to cut it in vain as I stood there waiting for them to get me a length of wire cable. So the grinder seems to be the best way to cut it. Now, what you have on the either end of the cable is what makes it unique and useful to whatever application you want to use it for. For instance, you can have the Clevis slip hook. It's an open hook. It has a bigger eye in it so that you can very easily throw it around the other end of the cable, around whatever you're dragging or pulling, or a tree or whatever, and the harder you pull, the more it tightens down on it. So it's sort of a self-tightening deal. You can also have these slip hooks that have a little, a little safety thing on it. It's not really a safety thing. It's just a spring-loaded little deal there that keeps once you put that on there, it keeps it from coming out again, because, you know, invariably you're dragging something, you put the hook around it, you get on your tractor and you start to go forward, and the hook comes off. Well, that little spring-loaded thing keeps it from, you know, coming out of the hook, which is handy. You can also have just a Clevis hook that for a chain. You know, it's got the more narrow, straight eye, and that's so that you can, slip that obviously around a link in a chain, and you can combine your steel cable with chain if you need more length. If your tree is a long way away and you're pulling that tree trying to get it to fall a certain way, you can add chain to the equation for even longer distance. Now the way these hooks are fastened to the cable is basically a pin, and you've got a little cotter pin that goes through a hole in the little bolt. One thing to note when you're installing these, you want to put the cotter pin end away from the eye end here, so that when you're grabbing around things, you know, after a while, you know, that cotter pin is going to get beat up and it might get rusty and then come loose and come out. So it's a good idea to make sure that the cotter pin end of this bolt is away from the business end of the hook. That's just incidental information thrown in. Now when you're making the loop that the hook goes in, you can obviously make a smaller eye like this one here, but what I like to do to offer more versatility is I like to have a larger loop here, because there are times where maybe I don't need the hook and I just want to throw this loop around something. For instance, if you're dragging something and you've got a ball hitch on the back of your tractor or on the back of your truck, you can just throw this loop over the ball hitch and go, because that'd be kind of, I don't even know if that fits around the ball hitch. So the bigger loops make it more versatile. With one hook on one end, you can grab the loop on the other if you needed to do it that way. So more versatility is always good. And if you wanted to, you could put more than one type of hook. You could have a slip hook and a chain hook on the same loop. And if you don't need them, they just fall down there. If you do need whichever one, you just use whichever one you need. There's another type of logging hook called a choker, which is often used in logging applications, in skidding logs and so forth. I think the nickname is a cat choker, supposedly because they're used in conjunction with Caterpillar equipment in big logging, but come on, we all know why it's called a cat choker. That's not funny. So the cat choker consists of basically two parts. You've got the bell part, which is a little housing, and then on the tip of the cable, and usually these are much bigger diameter cables, on the tip of that cable you've got the ferrule or the nub, which fits into the housing and locks. You can insert it one way, and then when you pull it another way, it slips down into a narrow section and kind of locks in there. And the other part, the bell, actually slides on the other part of the cable, so it chokes whatever you're pulling. And it's self-tightening, kind of like the open slip clevis hook is. The big advantage to the cat choker is that you can, if you've got a log laying on the ground, sometimes it's hard to get this loose, pliable cable underneath the log to be able to pull it around and fasten it with this side. So with those thicker cables that have the cat choker on them, they can be 3/4 inch or, you know, maybe even bigger or slightly smaller than that. They're very, very stiff cables, and it's almost like shoving a rod under the log. You can actually shove it, and it doesn't flex so much. You shove it under there, and then you can go to the other side of the log and grab it and pull that over, put it in the nub in the housing, and you're off. It's pulling, self-tightening on the log. You can skid your log. So that's the advantage of the cat choker, is basically being able to shove it under a log a lot easier. One thing to note, I see on all the places where you can order these cat chokers online that they say they are not for overhead use. So remember that, safety tip. Now, as I said earlier, the wire rope or steel cable is very hard to break, but the thing is, it's only as safe and as good and secure as the little clips that you fasten the cable back to itself with. So if these are faulty, it doesn't matter how strong your cable is, these are going to give away. And these are called wire clips. They're basically little U-bolts with little nuts on them, and they've got the little thing that, you know, clamps down. The tighter you tighten them, the more it clamps down onto the wire cable. You can also, another way to fasten a loop or an eye on a cable is they make little crimps that you can put around both wires, and then you crimp down on them very, very tight. They also make little protectors that go, I don't know if you can see that, on the inside is a piece of cupped metal with a trough, and the cable goes in the trough, and it just forms an eye right there, and that mainly protects the cable from fraying after a lot of use from the the hook rubbing against it or whatever. So they make those protectors of all sizes, and that's handy too. But it's not real practical in the big loop that I use. So, and that's this is a small diameter cable. I bought it at an auction, bottom of the box. You know how that goes. But when I'm fastening the cable together, I kind of do, when it's something that could potentially be dangerous, like if you're putting a lot of pressure on a tree, pulling it or pulling whatever, and you got a lot of pressure on that thing from a come along or whatever you're using to tighten it up, you don't want that thing snapping loose and coming back, and this coming back at that velocity could really do some damage to your head, which I'm not at all in favor of. So you want to make sure, overkill is not bad. Overkill can save your life. So I use 2 of these little U-boat clamps on there, and I really, really crank down on them just to ensure that it's very safely done and there's no chance that that's going to come loose. Incidentally, one other thing about this is fairly new cable that I made, and after a while, you'll get breaks in the little individual. It's made of individual little steel fibers. I hadn't mentioned that already, but sometimes those individual fibers will fray. One will break and it'll be sticking up. So if you're ever using these and they get kind of worn or kind of old, you might want to use gloves, because if you're pulling on that rope or wrapping it up, you'll invariably come across that wire and it'll cut. It hurts like the dickens. So be careful of that when these cables start getting a little age to them. I mentioned you can have different size cables. Here's a small one that I think I bought. I didn't make this one, and somebody put 2 heavier duty big old C clamps or U-boat clamps on these to make sure they didn't fail. This one actually has this is kind of useful. It's got a hook that swivels and your cable won't twist or whatever. So that's kind of neat. It's got the little safety thing on there. A small cable is good for a variety of things. For instance, you're clearing, a lot of you have homesteads, and oftentimes on a new homestead, you're having to pull up, cut down trees to make pasture, or pull up shrubs or saplings that are kind of annoying and get those roots out of the way, especially if you're going to make a garden plot. And this is very useful for if you've got a tractor or, team of good mules or whatever, and you're pulling up those shrubs, you can put this around. Sometimes shrubs grow in a cluster, and you can wrap this around that cluster, put that on there, and as you pull, it just grabs the brush or the saplings or the bush or whatever down low and just yanks them right out of the ground. The harder you pull, the harder it holds on to whatever you're pulling on, as long as you got the power to pull it up. That's what makes these shorter cables very, very useful. You can use them to skid logs, because it's very cumbersome to use a very long cable for skidding logs, because you don't want the cable 50 foot behind you. You want it right behind the tractor. So very good for skidding logs or cants, or maybe you got a friend that's gotten in a jam and he's stuck. He's on a hot date and he needs help, and you can pull him out of a terrible situation with a short bit of cable there. Now a longer cable, however long you want it, so it depends on what your needs are. A longer cable can be used to pull your friend out of deeper trouble should the need arise. You say, well, how long should I make my cable? Well, that's entirely up to you. I tell you how I arrived at the distance for this cable is I've got a 16-foot flatbed trailer that I haul my round bales on. And so I really don't have a large bucket on a tractor to be able to spear those bales and get them off and unload my trailer. So I do it the redneck engineered way. I use a cable and a tree to pull them off the trailer, just slide them off. So when I designed this particular cable, I measured from around the tree, around to the front of the trailer where the front bale is, and to the back to where it just meets, and I can hook the cable ends together and it goes around all 4 bales. That's how I determined what length I needed. You can make it whatever length you want, 12 foot, 20 foot, 30 foot, 100 foot. Boy, that'd be hard to, you could do it, but it'd be hard to deal with. Besides unloading hay from my trailer, one of the other great uses that I have for my long cable is when I'm cutting bigger trees and I want them to fall a particular direction. Trees don't always lean the direction you want them to fall. And so if you put a little pressure on that tree, you can basically keep it from, destroying your house and making your life miserable for a short while. And the long cable is very useful for that. And the way I do that is I'll take a short length of chain and I'll get as high up on that tree as I can, maybe use a ladder, and I'll put that short length of chain around the trunk of that tree as high up as possible and hook it on itself. And with the end that has the chain hook clevis on it, I'll hook onto that chain. With the other end, I can hook on to the come along and fasten that come along to the base of another tree that's at the proper distance, and then start winching that cable tight and tighter and tighter. And you can go make your notches on the tree like normal in the direction that you want it to fall, and basically keep putting pressure on that tree. Sometimes I use wedges or whatever, wooden wedges in there while I'm sawing to help make that tree lean, and then this adds pressure, and it's very good to make the tree fall wherever you want it to fall. Just think ahead. Common sense can preserve your life. Think about what you're doing, especially when you're dealing with large trees and wire ropes that have a lot of tension on them. It can be a dangerous situation. One other use, especially for those of you who are starting a new homestead, maybe you've bought a piece of land and you're not actually living there yet until you get your house situated or living situation situated. The long cables can be used to put around a couple of trees. I did that here when we were building our house. Put around a couple of trees across your driveway so that vehicles can't come down your driveway. It prevents people from driving down there and messing with your stuff or stealing your tools or whatever. It doesn't prevent them from walking around it or under it, but it can prevent them from getting a vehicle down your driveway. So that's one thing. You can go ahead and make it for that, and then later use it to, for other things, pulling hay off your trailer or putting a lien on trees. Just keep in mind that when you put a long cable across your driveway, it lets the world know, hey, I'm not here, come look around my place. So it can be a catch-22 if you know what I'm talking about. Well, I guess that about does it for my favorite farm tool, the steel cable. What a useful and versatile tool, and you can customize it to your own uses. If you'd like to add to the discussion, I wish you would. Just leave your comments or questions in the comment section below, and maybe you thought of another use for either a long wire rope or a short wire rope, steel cable, whatever you want to call it. Put that in the comment section below. That could be very useful to everyone reading those comments. I'm Paul Mack with my favorite farm tool, the steel cable or wire rope, whatever you want to call it. Until next time, I'll talk at you later.